March 8, 2014. 239 people boarded Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, expecting a routine trip to Beijing. Not a single one would ever be seen again. But what investigators discovered in the months that followed would reveal something far more sinister than a simple accident. When Flight 370's transponder went dark at 1:21 a.m., air traffic controllers assumed it was a technical glitch. They had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of aviation's greatest mystery. A mystery that would cost over $150 million to investigate, and leave families devastated, still searching for answers over a decade later. The passengers, 239 dreams cut short. Let's talk about who was on that plane, because these weren't just numbers. These were real people with families waiting for them. There were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. Among them, 2-year-old Ma Heng-wang traveling with his mom and dad, looking forward to seeing his grandparents. 50-year-old Philip Wood, an IBM executive planning to start a new life in Beijing with his girlfriend. 20 artists returning from an exhibition, excited to share their success with loved ones. The crew was led by Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah, a 53-year-old veteran pilot with 18,000 flight hours. Well-respected, experienced, a flight simulator enthusiast who loved flying so much he had a sophisticated setup at home. His colleagues described him as professional and safety-conscious. But investigators would later discover something on that home simulator that would change everything about this case. The night everything changed. Flight 370 took off at 12:41 a.m. from Kuala Lumpur. Everything was normal. Captain Zaharie was at the controls, his first officer Farik Abdul Hamid beside him. The Boeing 777 climbed smoothly into the night sky. At 1:01 a.m., they made routine contact with Malaysian Air Traffic Control. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zaharie said his last words, "Good night, Malaysian 370. His voice was calm, professional, unremarkable. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder was deliberately switched off. Not a malfunction. Not an accident. Someone in that cockpit made a conscious decision to vanish from radar. Seconds later, the aircraft made a sharp left turn, abandoning its route to Beijing. It was now flying back over Malaysia, toward the Andaman Sea. This wasn't a plane in distress. This was a plane being hijacked. But here's the chilling part, the hijacker was already in the cockpit. The 7-hour ghost flight. Here's where this case becomes truly haunting. After disappearing from radar, Flight 370 didn't crash. It flew for 7 more hours. Satellite data, something called handshake pings, tracked the aircraft as it made deliberate navigation points, flying south over the Indian Ocean. Whoever was controlling that plane knew exactly what they were doing. They avoided radar detection, flying along the borders between Malaysian and Thai airspace where neither country would notice. At 8:19 a.m., 7 hours after takeoff, the satellite received its final ping from Flight 370. The plane had run out of fuel somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. Then silence. 239 people had been flown to the most isolated spot imaginable, where they would vanish without a trace. The investigation, a global search. What followed was the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history. Ships and aircraft from 26 countries scoured 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. They found nothing. Well, almost nothing. In 2015, a piece of the plane's wing washed up on Réunion Island. Then more debris on beaches across the Indian Ocean. A flapper in here, a seat cushion there. Physical proof the plane had crashed. But where was the main wreckage? Where were the bodies? Where were the answers? The simulator discovery. FBI investigators analyzed Captain Zaharie's home flight simulator. And what they found was deeply disturbing. The simulator contained a route that was almost identical to the path Flight 370 actually took. A route programmed to fly into the remote southern Indian Ocean until fuel exhaustion. The same route. The same endpoint. This wasn't discovered until months after the disappearance, but when it came to light, everything clicked into place. Investigators also discovered that in the weeks before the flight, Captain Zaharie's personal life was unraveling. His marriage was falling apart. He was reportedly depressed. His wife had moved out. Friends said he seemed withdrawn, isolated. He was spending more and more time alone with his flight simulator, perfecting routes to nowhere. The psychological profile was building, piece by piece. The murder-suicide theory. Aviation experts, crash investigators, and intelligence analysts have studied this case for over a decade. The evidence points to one horrifying conclusion: Captain Zaharie deliberately crashed Flight 370 in a pilot-induced murder-suicide. He waited until the plane entered Vietnamese airspace, then turned off all communication systems. He likely depressurized the cabin, rendering the passengers and crew unconscious through hypoxia. Then he flew for 7 hours, alone in the cockpit, until the fuel ran out and the plane plunged into the ocean. But why? Why would an experienced pilot with an unblemished record murder 238 innocent people? Some experts believe it was a final act of control by a man who felt his life spiraling out of his grasp. Others suggest it was a twisted form of revenge against Malaysia Airlines or the government. We may never know the true motivation. What we do know is that he had the means, the opportunity, and based on the simulator evidence, he had planned it. Alternative theories. Not everyone accepts the pilot's suicide theory. Some believe there was a fire or mechanical failure that incapacitated the crew. Others point to the possibility of hijacking by passengers, though no evidence supports this. There are even conspiracy theories involving military shootdowns or secret cargo. But none of these alternatives explain the deliberate route changes, the turned-off transponder, or the simulator evidence. Occam's razor suggests the simplest explanation is usually correct. The families left behind. For the families of the 239 victims, there has been no closure. No bodies recovered. No final resting place to visit. No concrete answers about those final moments. They are left with theories, with probabilities, with haunting questions. Grace Nathan lost her mother on Flight 370. She's spent years demanding answers, forming support groups, pushing for continued searches. We deserve to know what happened, she says. They deserve to be found. The Malaysian government officially declared the disappearance an accident. But families and investigators know it was far more sinister. In 2018, the official search was called off after 4 years and $160 million spent. Private searches have continued sporadically, but the vast Indian Ocean keeps its secrets well. The main wreckage of Flight 370 remains lost, somewhere in the depths, along with the truth of those final hours. Lessons learned. The disappearance of Flight 370 exposed massive gaps in aviation safety. How could a modern jetliner simply vanish? The industry has responded. New regulations now require real-time tracking of aircraft. Black box batteries last longer. Cockpit security protocols have been strengthened. But these changes came too late for the 239 souls aboard MH370. Their tragedy forced an industry to confront its vulnerabilities. There's also been increased focus on pilot mental health screening. The stigma around depression and seeking help in the aviation industry has been challenged. Airlines now have better support systems, more frequent psychological evaluations, and resources for pilots struggling with personal issues. These are positive changes, born from unspeakable tragedy. On March 8, 2014, 239 people said goodbye to their loved ones, never knowing they wouldn't return. Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah took control of Flight 370 and made a decision that would create aviation's greatest mystery. The satellite data doesn't lie. The simulator evidence is damning. The deliberate actions that night point to one man, one cockpit, and one horrifying choice. Whether we ever find the wreckage or not, the evidence tells us what happened. Flight 370 was a pilot-induced murder-suicide. And 239 innocent people paid the ultimate price.